So hi, everybody. My name is Kristen Fletcher. I'm the Programs and Engagement Manager here at the Haley Public Library. I'm glad you could join us tonight in celebration for Native American Heritage Month. Tonight's talk is Teaching Native Pride, Upward Bound and the Legacy of Isabel Bond with local award-winning writer Tony Tekaroniake Evans. Before we begin, I would like to recognize that we are gathered together right now on the traditional homelands of the Sosoni and the Bannock peoples, and thank and acknowledge them as the past, present, and future stewards of the land and the water that supports us. I invite you to join me in that acknowledgement, in that respect, and in that gratitude. So we always like to feature a book, and you won't be too surprised to know that it is Teaching Native Pride, Tony's book. So we have it here. You can check it out after I get finished reading with it, and Darlene has her own copy there. So we encourage you to do so. So it is my pleasure to introduce Tony, an enrolled Bear Clan member of the Caughnawaga Mohawks of Quebec. Tony Tekaroniake Evans is an author and award-winning reporter for the Idaho Mountain Express. His assignments have included travels to the Kingdom of Tonga to report on traditional Polynesian sailing practices, interviewing Rumi translator Coleman Barks, and covering the 115,000 acre Beaver Creek fire that caused him, his wife, and 2 cats to evacuate their home in Haley. Tony studied cultural anthropology and biology at the University of Colorado at Boulder and won the expatriate scholarship to the Prague summer writing workshop at Charles University in 1996. His writing has been published in the Taos News, Santa Fe New Mexican, Mountain Gazette, Idaho Arts Quarterly, Boise Weekly, and the Environmental News Network. He has contributed reporting to BBC Live Sunday Edition and Boise State Public Radio. He currently develops travel tour podcasts of Native America and has offered creative writing workshops in Ketchum since 2004. He is also the author of A History of Indians in the Sun Valley and a just published book, yesterday I understand, a new book called Memory and Destiny, The Life of Glenn Jans. And then as you'll see, as Tony continues to talk more about his book, we will also be joined by Darlene Dyer, who is a retired but longtime Wood River High School teacher, and she played an important part of the Isabel Bond story that we'll be learning about. So let's see, Tony, I am going to spotlight you. And Darlene, I'm going to spotlight you. Or I guess we're going to spotlight Darlene in a little bit, right? So
yeah, I think
you had something you wanted to start with.
I'm going to introduce our special guest in just a few minutes. So thank you so much, Kristen, for a wonderful introduction. I can't believe I did all those things. It seemed like somebody else. This book is the greatest writing project I've ever had. And I feel really honored to help tell the stories in this book. You know, as I look out here at this gallery view, I'm seeing a few dark spaces. There's Drennan, and then there's Florence. We can't see your faces. It would be so nice if you turn on your camera. If you do, we could have a quick game of Hollywood Squares, you know, from gallery view. You guys all look like movie stars to me. So there you are, Drennan. Good to see you, my friend.
Good evening, Tony.
Anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. I really love Zoom. It's kind of fun. I am going to jump into a few topics of general concern and current events in the United States today. I'm going to share my screen, and again, we're going to have our fingers crossed, make sure that it works. We're using PowerPoint here, and we're working through the last minute issues just a little while ago. As some of you may know, there have been some big changes in US governmental positions lately, especially with regard to Native American representation. Can anyone tell me if my screen is sharing there with a picture of Mr. Charles Sams?
Yes, it is, Tony.
Okay, so here's some recent events. Charles Sams, a Umatilla Native American fella, is now the director of the National Parks Service. And this is an organization, a federal department that has had long and fraught relations with Native American communities for a very long time. Clearly, things are changing in the United States today when we have a Native person qualified and entrusted by the White House to run the National Park Service. I, for one, am very excited about this development. Another one that I'm sure you've all heard about is Mrs. Deb Holland, a Laguna Pueblo woman from New Mexico, who is the Secretary of the Interior of the United States. Now, the Interior Department controls 75% of all federal lands in the United States. And this is an extraordinary development in the United States. And I'll just say that I recently had a good long chat with my friend and Bellevue resident who works for the Bureau of Land Management, which exists within Interior. His name is John Kurtz, and he's a Bellevue City Councilman. I'm sorry, Bellevue Planning and Zoning Chair, who told me that very recently there's been an entire change of attitude within the BLM, and he can sense it from the top down. There's a new collegiality going on within the Bureau of Land Management, and he attributes that to changes at the top. 2 weeks ago, this press release came out of the White House, and I read it in detail, and I was hoping to do some reporting on it eventually. I'm looking for an opportunity. This is the US president elevating the significance of indigenous traditional ecological knowledge in policymaking in the United States public policy. They're going to form a committee early next year to begin assessing policy developments, but using indigenous knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge. And in case you're not clear on what TEK is, it is a body of observations, oral and written knowledge, practices, and beliefs that promotes environmental sustainability and the responsible stewardship of natural resources through relationships between humans and environmental systems. It is applied to phenomena across biological, physical, cultural, and spiritual systems. Now, what's remarkable about this press release, what I discovered when I dug into it a little bit, is that there are words like science and spirituality used in the same sentence. And when things like that happen, I feel like we are moving toward a more holistic view of our relations to the natural world. And in this case, we can thank generations of indigenous people who have stood up for their very survival, first of all, and also their connections to the land and to this country at large. It's a very, very encouraging development for me. And I just want to say that there was a program at the University of Idaho many years ago, one that we'll be talking about tonight, which was way ahead of the curve in exploring and celebrating Native history within the context of education and higher education. Now, before I go on, I want to stop sharing. And well, actually, I'll go one more slide. How's that? Some years ago, I was invited to go participate in a project. And after presenting at the Nez Perce Executive Council, I was sent down to the Casino Tribal newspaper and told that I could have them write a story about me because, and this was the headline of the article that I wrote for the Nez Perce newspaper, author seeks stories about Isabel Bond and Upward Bound. That is Isabel Bond. That is the photograph of her standing on the Bow Bridge right here in Haley, Idaho, sometime before this project began. So after 5 years of research and writing, sponsored by our special guest, who I'll introduce momentarily, this is the book that resulted.
So Tony, I don't know what you did when you stopped your presenter view, but we can now see both your slides and your presenter notes.
Oh, well, that's okay. I don't think I was hiding too much there. Kind of winging it anyway. So this book that I'm going to do some readings from tonight, and we will share some more fun photographs. It would not have been possible, not for 1 minute, without the support and the encouragement of my good friend Darlene Dyer, who her students during the Upward Bound days early on knew her as Darlene Madsen. Now, I want to just engage, if I could, Darlene, in maybe a little bit of banter and back and forth and about the origins of the book project. Maybe we can remind one another how this process started
10 to 6.
many years ago.
Tomorrow, Monday.
Florence,
Okay. Oh, you good.
Florence, your audio's on. Is that Florence Blanchard? Oh, well, hi, if it is.
I just
Anyway.
muted her.
Darlene, if you'll unmute yourself for a minute.
Okay.
I've been trying to kind of reaching back to when I first met you, and I think it had to do with your English classes. But I was hoping maybe you could kind of jump in and, I don't know, maybe say a little bit about how this project started.
Okay. Well, Tony, of course, I've known for years, and he was one of the public people that would help my high school juniors with writing. And they would put together a little sample of their writing, and I would deliver it to area business people or whatever. And Tony was one of those people who volunteered to help out and give feedback. And so then we just kind of cultivated a friendship over the years. And then when I retired in 2014, I thought a lot about, my career, and a large part of that career was spending every summer. Teachers don't make quite enough money, so they work during the summers. So I worked every summer at the University of Idaho in the Upward Bound project. And I started in the late 70s when I was teaching at Moscow High School. And I developed a good friendship with the director, Isabel Bond. And over the years, we became very, very close friends. So I just felt like Isabel was someone who had an influence on so many student lives that she should not go unrecognized. And I would, do what I could to help promote that image. And so I contacted Tony. Tony had a little ad in the Mountain Express about writing memoirs or something. And so I called him, and he came over with his notepad, and we just started in and me talking about her. And then I know later on he went up to Moscow and stayed with Idabel, and he went ahead and learned so many contacts. I mean, I feel like this is a person who knows more about my life than my husband. So anyway, that's how it started.
Thanks, Darlene. And I do remember now that you asked me, you said, head up to Moscow. I want you to meet my best friend, Isabel Bond, We worked together for many, many years, and she worked with Native American students at a organization called Upward Bound. I knew nothing about Upward Bound at the time, and I knew very little about the Nez Perce and the Sioux Nation. I'd heard about Chief Joseph, the War of 1877. I'd read about it. But I was fascinated with the prospect of learning what had gone on during these many summers, and especially within a group of Native and non-Native students who were thrown together on this college campus and on their field trips and on their recreation and in their intense study skills classes. You know, my curiosity was in part, it was piqued because I was very curious about what sort of acculturation would go on between these two groups. And after talking with Idabel at Applebee's restaurant in Moscow, having a long dinner, she told me that we have all these yearbooks, you know, these summer yearbooks that were written by the students with photography and with poetry, with essays, you know, personal accounts of their summers. And I came back here to Haley and I started looking through that collection of yearbooks, and it was an extraordinary trove of, I guess you'd call that, you know, primary materials if you're a historian, or secondary at least. And there was one year that really stood out, and that was the year of 1988, the Chief Joseph Trail here, which I happen to have a hat now that was saved all these years by one of the teachers, Rudy Bosch, who lives now, he's retired in Indian Creek in Haley, Idaho. And he gave me this hat out of his collection as a souvenir. And this was the Chief Joseph Trail trip of 1988, which is featured in chapter 8 in the book, the long chapter in the center of the book, which really is the crux of the story, in my opinion. Anyway, as I said, I presented the, first I said, yes, Darlene, yes, I want to do this project. This is the most exciting thing I can think of. And then I went to the executive council, and at the invitation of Bill Picard, who wrote the introduction for the book. And Bill introduced me to the committee there, and I presented what I wanted to do. I told them a little bit about my background, where I'm from. I happen to be a Mohawk guy from way back east. And as soon as I mentioned Isabel Bond's name, everyone on the council just perked up and said, oh, we love Isabel Bond. Of course, we're going to support you in this. And what can we do? And I said, well, it'd be nice to be in touch with your language and culture department a little bit. That never actually panned out very well. But I did get some initial instruction from Josiah Pinkham in the deeper history of the Nez Perce Nation as it's represented in the Nez Perce National Historical Park. And I went to work calling people and just did what journalists do. We knock on doors, we call people, we ask questions, and started building the story from there. And Darlene, I remember wondering how we were going to sort of collaborate on this project. And one of the most gratifying things to hear from you was, Tony, I trust you creatively to do this. There was no micromanagement. It was very much of a very trusting relationship, and very friendly and very supportive. And I just want to thank you for, well, all the support that you gave me. And oftentimes it was emotional and encouragements along the way, because there were some long winters there where I wasn't sure where I was going with this.
Right. And it took years, you know. This wasn't something that you just wrote in a week.
No.
It's like 6 years.
Mm-hmm. Yep, 6 years while holding down a newspaper job and writing another book as well, the last 4 years of that. So anyway, I think we pulled something off here, and I think it's a real testament to your work and the work of your fellow teachers, and also to Isabel, of course, you know, the legacy of Isabel Bond in that part of the world. And I understand it's been very well received by the tribe, by a couple, at least 2 or 3 tribes. And it's sold in the museum there at the National Park headquarters. And yeah, I just can't say enough. I look forward to getting up there and getting to talk with you when this pandemic clears up, maybe having an audience up there in Nez Perce country. Well, so I guess my next goal would be to do a little bit of a reading. Would anyone, if anyone, I want to also say that with such a small group, I'm perfectly open to having conversation and questions as we go. So you can post in the chat for Kristen, and Kristen can moderate questions. Or if you find us slowing down in our banter, or you know, there's just a quiet spot and anybody wants to ask questions, we're happy to answer as we go along. Okay.
So Tony, I'd just like to say something about why I continued to work in this job, not just because I befriended a person who directed it, but because it was really the highlight of my career. You know, every summer I think teachers were there for 7 weeks, but the students were on campus for 6 weeks. And it was an experience that you don't have in public school, because you're eating meals with these students, you're doing study table with them at night. Sometimes I would just go to a student's dorm to help them out. It's like they can't get away. And we went camping on the weekends. We would play sports together in the evenings. And, you know, your public school students, they go home after school. You see them for an hour. And so this was very different. And students made all kinds of progress. And that was the most rewarding thing to see in a 6-week program, to see reading skills go up, especially in, you know, my area in English. So that was the reason I kept coming back. It was a terrific experience, not just for the kids, but for me.
Darlene, I have a question for you. How many years did you work there?
So I worked there from 79 to 93.
So 14 years. Wow.
Yeah, I think it's really 15, but yeah. Sorry.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the Upper Down program began in 1969 at the University of Idaho, and really gained steam in the 1970s and in the 1980s. I'm going to read something now from some of the early years of Darlene's involvement in the program, and then we'll share some photographs after.
Tony, your voice is going in and out.
Oh, okay. How's it going now? Better? All right, good. Thank you. I will use my grown-up voice here. Okay, this is from an early chapter called Teaching at Up or Down, which, by the way, the nickname for the program at the University of Idaho was the Indian Program. And that was my chosen title for the book until Washington State University Press told me they were going to publish the book, in which case they were going to change the title. And I'm very happy that they did. I wouldn't have chosen such a bold cover and such a bold title. But this chapter is titled The Indian Program. And it's, I think you'll recognize some of the people in it. One of them, begin with talking about, is Gail Jensen, who is a friend of Darlene's. They worked together for many years. But as with other teachers in the program, they had regular teaching jobs in certain towns and cities around Idaho, or around the Northwest, I imagine. And then in their summers, they dedicated half of their summers to the Up or Down program. Without the U of I campus, the program would not have worked, said Gail Jensen, who came to Upward Bound as a student teacher from Troy, Idaho in 1977. She recently retired from teaching. Isabel succeeded because she took them to this beautiful environment and showed them people who are respectful of education, where they could explore things they knew nothing about. You never had to say, education is important. Education is power. They could see it all around them. Nationwide, 63% of Upward Bound programs offer summer residential programs designed to stimulate a college-going experience. Many other programs offer after-school classes and tutoring at participants' regular school locations. Gail taught 3 or 4 basic English classes each summer, teaming up with fellow teacher Darlene Madsen Dyer to introduce students to the world of literature. After Darlene assumed a study skills teaching position in 1980, Gail and Darlene worked closely together as Upward Bound English teachers for another 13 summers. While their students took an interest in drama, literature, and science, many of them focused ultimately on what the education they were receiving could do for the tribes. The tribes desperately needed health professionals, teachers, and fish and game biologists, said Gail. The teachers wasted no time in bringing the students up to speed in their studies. They spent at least a couple of hours each day on reading and writing. In later years, Gail taught math and science. She also instructed her students in taking and transcribing notes and showing them how to access library resources to research scientific reports. Using the library's card catalog was a huge step for them, she said. The fact is that if kids are not reading well by 4th grade, they're likely to struggle with it for the rest of their lives. We were trying to make up in 6 weeks' time for a half semester of high school classes. The Upward Bound experience also provided an ideal environment for experimentation on the part of teachers. They used popular culture as a stepping off point to engage students' creativity and inspiration. Isabel's teachers were part of a new generation that celebrated multicultural values. They were eager to expand their students' understanding of the region's first inhabitants. Working for Isabel Bond made that mission implicit. All of us are living on Indian land here, Gail said. It is respectful to know who came before us and lived here for thousands of years. A lot of white kids had no idea who the land had belonged to. The Native kids, even though they may have gone to powwows, sometimes had no idea how their history connected to the land. But this story is a part of who we are and what we are in the West. While teaching at Upward Bound, Gail soon learned how traditional values could run counter to the expectations of mainstream society and the American dream. Reservation kids will value a relationship more than anything else, more than a house and car or some great financial success. If someone were in need, they would walk away from a class or a job to help. Nothing takes precedence over a friend or relative calling and asking for help. Native American students would also leave school to attend funerals and other ceremonies or to play a game together or watch a movie. During the first couple of years, Gail said, I had to learn to respect their values about responsibility and not place mine upon them. I valued education above all. They may choose that, but they are not necessarily going to value the things that I value, like a nice little house with a green yard and a white picket fence and money in the bank. Some of the Native families we worked with had been living in houses for only 100 years. Often it was a relationship between an uncle or an aunt or some other relative that came first. In 1978, Darlene left the Midwest for Moscow, Idaho to take courses leading to an Idaho teaching credential. She had no idea at the time how immersed she would become in the nearby Native American communities. She began by taking classes from Professor Eleanor Michael, a former Upward Bound study skills teacher who had pursued her doctorate at the University of Michigan and was by then teaching full-time at the University of Idaho in the College of Education. Eleanor encouraged me to work at Upward Bound, so I went to meet Isabel Bond in the spring of 1979, Darlene recalled. She was intrigued by Isabel's office library, which contained numerous volumes relating to nearby tribes, especially the Nez Perce. Isabel was charismatic, she said. Her teaching staff returned again and again each summer, even though I soon learned that she was working everyone nearly to death. Like most Upward Bound teachers, Darlene and Gail held regular teaching jobs elsewhere in Idaho, but traveled to Moscow for the 6-week Upward Bound programs. Many other teachers, counselors, cooks, former students, and other support staff also made the annual trek. Darlene took the job at Upward Bound and subsequently carried on and further improvised on what Eleanor Michael had begun. After her first summer of teaching in the program, however, she was so exhausted that she became uncertain about pursuing a teaching career at all. A principal from a school in nearby Clarkston, Washington, phoned her to say he would hire her on the spot, but she turned him down. Instead, she spent that school year substituting at Moscow High School. By fall of 1981, Darlene decided to pursue a master's degree. She worked for Professor George Canny, serving as a teaching assistant in his Introduction to Reading class and assisting with his research. Darlene's office space happened to be in the same location as the Upward Bound office, so she continued to interact with Isabel and her students. At Isabel's suggestion, Darlene began to read the books in the Upward Bound library about the once vast Nez Perce homeland, which at one time included the land under the University of Idaho. She learned about the early Presbyterian missionaries, the treaties of 1855 and 1863, and the war fought against the followers of Chief Joseph in 1877, which took place only a century earlier. For me, this became a very important history, said Darlene. I thought it was amazing that we would be out there teaching the descendants of Chief Looking Glass and Chief Joseph. Aside from in movies and on TV, I had never actually seen Indians before. I was from Chicago, where I'd only seen wooden cigar store Indians. That was it. Darlene remained reluctant about teaching and about Upward Bound. During her first week on the job, she discovered just how challenging her new students could be. One evening before dinner, she unpacked her papers and headed to Targhee Hall for an evening of study table, eager to help a group of young men prepare for classes. After parking her car and climbing the steps to the dormitory entrance, she heard voices from above and looked up just in time to see buckets full of water and water balloons headed her way from the roof. A group of students who should have been heading to the study table had instead mobilized an ambush to demoralize the new teacher. Shocked, angry, and soaking wet, Darlene simply turned around and drove her car back home. I wasn't ready for this at all, she said. It was completely humiliating because I was not in on the game. Darlene recalled some 35 years later. I went home to think about what I should do. I knew there was a balance I had to keep as a teacher between knowing your students and being their friend and keeping enough authority for them to respect you. But something like this, it was just too much. Before Darlene could decide how best to respond, a yellow school bus pulled up in front of her house, driven by a stern-faced Isabel Bond. Out stepped a dozen or so young men who mostly looked at the ground as Isabel instructed them in no uncertain terms to make apologies to Mrs. Madsen. They walked into my home, single file, and said they were sorry, and then got back on the bus. Isabel then drove them back to campus, said Darlene. That was the end of it, or so everyone thought. I learned a lot about interacting with kids from Isabel, about showing by example and holding kids responsible for their actions, said Darlene. But as supportive as she was of her students, she was equally supportive of her staff. I knew from that day on that Isabel had our backs. Now I'd like to share a screen here, and Darlene, if you would like, you might help us understand some of these photos. Kristen, is that looking okay? Or Darlene, is that looking good?
Your book title, yeah, I see it.
Okay. So here's some of the people that were in Upward Bound back in the day. I think this must have been during one of the horse programs. Do you remember this one at all, Darlene?
Oh, you bet. Yeah, I took that picture. So every summer, we concocted sort of a different theme from which, all of the disciplines would kind of come together. So I think this was maybe in the summer of the horse. I can't remember if it was 91, 92. I don't remember exactly, but we were on a trip over to the WSU vet science facility with our students. And we learned a lot about the history of horses. And I just happened to catch this photo because I don't know, the horse was smiling along with the kids,
It's just so perfect. And somebody's about to lose his hat, I think.
Maybe.
Here's some other cool cats. I like all the plaid. A lot of good plaid on the guy on the right there.
Right. I'm not sure about the plaids there, but that was taken in the boys' dorm. And
Is the guy on the left David Tapto by any chance?
no.
Okay.
But I can find out who those people are.
Okay. This is the kind of activities that students would have sometimes on their days off, right? What river were they rafting though?
So this is on the Selway. We would take students camping on the weekends, and maybe a couple of times during the summer, we would go rafting, and we took them up just below the falls because the water it's not real rapid, so they have to do a lot of paddling, but it's not as dangerous, for them to go down the Selway. Anyway, so this was a photo that was taken from the bridge, and students are, just looking at Isabel and I. But this is the other part of your book. Can I tell it?
Oh yeah, please do.
Where so we had gotten a bunch of buckets of water, and we were standing on the bridge, and as the kids went under, we dumped water on top of them. But this is like years later, from my little experience with water getting dumped. But anyway, they're so excited to see us, and then shortly they're going to get drenched.
I love that. You told me that story, and I pushed that part of the story about the bridge to many chapters later in the book, or several chapters later on. But it's one of those things you do as a writer is when you're plotting things out, you have one story about water balloons from the top of the dorms, and then you have buckets later on where you and Isabel are giggling like little girls running with your buckets down to the edge of the bridge. And it was kind of like the chickens coming home to roost, you kind of got them back. That was very funny. Well, now here's a picture of Darlene and your good friend there.
So this is Shelley Hall, or actually Shelley Smead is her married name now. And she was probably the best student teacher I ever had. And I do think when this picture was taken, she was doing a second year with Upward Bound, not just student teaching. And she went on to be a teacher in the Idaho Falls School District, and she's now principal of the middle school there. And this was I think this was taken during a casino night that we had in the auditorium on campus. And anyway, I love those shoulder pads.
Oh, yeah. And the kind of big hair there too. And this picture reminds me, Darlene, so much of a part in the book where you described going onto the reservation for the first time and knocking on the doors of the parents of the students that you were working with. And I think what it was you said was, you know, what is this? Who is this big blonde Sayapo doing here at my house on the reservation? Sayapo is white person in Nez Perce. And having the, you know, the courage to really show up and then sit down at the kitchen tables and start doing some study skills with these people, because you didn't exactly fit in on the reservation as a tall American Swedish woman, right?
Right. Not too many people looked like me there, but they all recognized me, you know, from being their teacher or being in Upward Bound, and they were very welcoming. And Isabel sent me down there to just kind of refurbish, you know, the skills. And it was interesting to see that what we had taught, we taught in study skills the system of note taking, and it's called the Cornell Method. And so this would have been like sometime in the fall, you know, October, November, and I would be down visiting families and students, and they would get out their notebooks and they would show me what they were doing in school right now, and it reflected what we had done during the summer. So that was very rewarding.
Thank you. Now, I have no idea what was going on here, but obviously the bus isn't working. And,
that's right.
Can
We have plenty of manpower.
There's Idabel over there on the left, kind of riding herd on all of these bus pushers. Did you guys run out of gas, or what was going on there?
I think she is pushing, but I don't see anybody behind the wheel, so I really don't know what's.
Oh, there's somebody in there. I just wondered if the bus calmed down. Okay. Maybe you were on a field trip or something.
Oh, yes, I'm sure we were on a field trip, right? But maybe it just didn't go in reverse. I used to have a car like that.
Now, here's another photograph I found in our selection. And obviously, this is a megalodon, correct? This would have been one of those ancient giant sharks. And is this one of the trips you took to the West Coast with the kids?
This is somewhere in Washington State, but now I can't remember exactly where it is. But anyway, it was a weekend field trip, and I can't remember whether this was, you know, sort of a recreational facility that just had this display. I honestly don't remember.
I do remember you telling me the story of there were a lot of the kids, native and non-native, all going to school together, but they had never seen the ocean. And this was their first trip to the West Coast to actually see the ocean, and you had rooms arranged, and yet they all insisted on sleeping outside if at all possible.
Right. That was back in the 70s when Eleanor was in charge, and she was the person who actually took them all the way to the coast to see the ocean.
Now, this must have been back in around Moscow, maybe at Lapway. Do you remember? There's a talking stick there, I think. Yeah,
I remember the gathering with the talking stick, and there are There are a couple of elders that aren't visible in this circle, but it seems to me that this was also on a field trip that maybe we went over to Hood River, that area up the Columbia. And so we met with some Native people there and had this interchange of talking.
Well, Dale, I think I'm going to do just a little bit more reading, and then, but right now I want to stop share and see if anyone has any questions so far for Darlene or for me about writing the book. Be happy to have a conversation.
Yeah, nothing in the chat.
Yeah. I'm going to read then from a chapter a little deeper into the book, and this is Into Worlds, chapter 11, Into Worlds. And this is about a woman by the name of Mabel. She goes by Robin Black Eagle. Cultural cross currents. Although kids of a certain age have many things in common, the layers of history in Idaho offer diverse perspectives to students from differing backgrounds. Mabel Black Eagle, also 44, is descended from the Wallowa band of Chief Joseph and his brother Ollicott. Her father, Martin Black Eagle, is descended from Reuben Black Eagle, a spiritual healer. These days, Mabel works as a community coordinator, aide at the YEOS Community Center in Kamiah. Am I saying that right, Darlene? I never got a good pronunciation. YEOS? Okay. I come from a family that is spread across the entire Nez Perce Reservation. My father tells me that I'm related to everyone in the tribe, even though I married a white man, said Mabel. Yolanda Guzman Bisbee was one of Mabel's Upward Bound counselors, along with Philip Allen. Having these Native American counselors made it easier for Mabel to fit in on campus because they understood where she was from. But in 1922, Mabel was failing in her grades during her sophomore year in high school and was told she had to finish her classes with passing grades or be held back a year. I was pretty good at science and math, but not at all with English, writing, and reading, Mabel recalled. I had some older cousins who were attending Upward Bound. They were there almost every year because they loved the place. Kamiah, which is a small town within the Nez Perce Reservation, Kamiah was small. I was a small town girl who had gone to the same building for elementary school and middle school. When I went to Upward Bound at the U of I campus, there were huge, beautiful lawns and trees and tall buildings, each one offering something different. I struggled the first week remembering where I had to go. It seemed like I wound up in the wrong classroom at least once or twice. During her first week at Upward Bound, Mabel's older cousins encouraged her to bully another student who they said did not fit in with their group. She wanted to hang out with us, but she dressed up in these tight pants and cowgirl boots. Well, my cousins would rather dress up in the 80s style with big hair. They just didn't want this girl standing around with us. My cousins knew I was an easy target. I let peer pressure get to me and listened to the older kids tell me to pick on this younger girl. What Mabel did not realize at the time was that Idabel and her staff had carefully cultivated an atmosphere where Upward Bound where students could interact without the usual social pressures of high school. Mabel told the younger girl not to sit by them, but Idabel was watching. And she came over and took Idabel aside for a talk. She said she did not approve of that kind of action, so she was sending me home. The truth is that I was happy to go because I did not want to spend my summer in school away from fishing and camping. Mabel's father, Martin Black Eagle, arrived on campus to take her back to Kamiah. He gave her a long speech during the 2-hour ride home. He read me the riot act about how important education is. He said we all had to make sacrifices from our usual freedoms. By the time I got to Kamiai, it was pretty well decided that I was going back and that I would have to sincerely apologize to Isabel. Mabel was reminded by her father about a time in her family's history when education in some of the white man's ways became vital for the tribe. I grew up going to church in Kamiai, but I knew that other sides of my family had followed more of the dreamer traditional religion. My dad had told us about when scarlet fever and the pox came along. The traditional healers tried but could not help. He said his grandmother was still doing medicine dances to heal the people, but some of them died and the families got mad at her for not helping. By the time her father was ready to drop her off in Kamiai, Mabel had reconsidered the importance of higher education. Somehow Isabel was also there. She was doing something nearby with some horses when we arrived, Mabel said. I don't know if she had planned this with my father, but I had to get in right in her face and apologize. She was watching me closely to see how sincere I was. Isabel agreed to take me back to the university as long as I didn't pull any more of my shenanigans. I have only good things to say about Mrs. Isabel Bond today. She wouldn't let me fail. Although she temporarily expelled me from Upward Bound for bullying, her intention was to teach me a lesson of respect. Mabel gained a new perspective on her homeland later that summer when a group of students were brought to the Pullman Moscow airport for a private flight in a small airplane. The flight instructor took off and we flew over the reservation. He let me push in the throttle and push on the pedals and steer to see what it was like to fly an airplane. She looked down for the first time on Nez Perce country and the surrounding Palouse region of rolling hills that give way to deep gorges along the Clearwater and Salmon rivers. They flew toward the vast Camas Prairie, across many square miles of farmland and high above Kamiai. She could see the dense Nez Perce National Forest in the mountains back behind Kamiai, where the tribe had once migrated along the Lola Trail to Montana for buffalo hunting. The plane flew farther south toward Grangeville, beyond which the prairie drops off into Whitebird Grade and then descends toward the deep valley of the Salmon River. The plane then looped back toward Lewiston above the Nez Perce Reservation's western boundary, flying above Cottonwood and Winchester, and then back to the airport for a landing. It took no more than 20 minutes, and we were able to see pretty much the whole reservation, Mabel remembered. The airplane flight that Mabel took in 1992 would have passed over a wooded area on the outskirts of the reservation boundary in the remote village called Forest, Idaho, where Shel Renee Josefovitz lived as a child. Shel Merrill when she was a young woman. She grew up living in a tent with no running water, electricity, or TV. My parents were hippies, very anti-government, said Shel, now 51 and retired from a military career. There was a lot of drinking and drugs. We lived like it was the 1800s. I didn't have much of a family. Do you know how cold it gets in a tent in Forest, Idaho in the winter? I think my mother was bipolar. There were no pictures of me as a kid. My father was alcoholic, and so he had a hard time keeping a job. Shel attended Craigmont High School, but because of her living circumstances, she had few friends until she transferred to Lapwai High School on the Nez Perce Reservation. There she met a girl named April Williams. I would never have survived if I had not been taken in by April and her family. I was pretty self-destructive. I certainly would not have graduated high school if not for Upward Bound. Shel said goodbye to her parents after her junior year and moved to the Nez Perce Reservation. She and April were Lapwai cheerleaders and attended Upward Bound together. Moving to Lapwai was like winning the lottery for me. I was called the token white girl. They called me Dopey because I was always goofy. The fact is, I would not be here today if it were not for Upward Bound and the families and counselors at Lapland. Shell became a part of April's extended family. She met the Waters family, including Upward Bound cultural liaison Mari Waters and her nephew, O.J. Waters. Mari gave Shell her first Appaloosa horse and named it Gypsy Cochise after the Chiricahua Apache chiefs. She also taught me how to do beadwork and make shawls and how to speak some of the Nez Perce language. These people taught me about family, how to take care of one another, and how to take care of ourselves. They were also there to make sure we graduated from high school. Shell watched movies for the first time on a VCR in Peggy Two Hatchet's house. She braided O.J. Waters' hair in his history classes. O.J. was kind of a trickster. When we went to Wallowa Lake on the Upward Bound trip, he took me snipe hunting. I didn't know any better. He teased me, told me to call out for the snipes, but not to whistle. Because if I whistled, the stick Indians would come after me. These were some kind of spirits that lived in the lake. I was terrified, she said. Shell went to powwows and attended pipe ceremonies and 7-drum honoring ceremonies. April's father showed Shell how to smoke salmon and make jerky from buffalo that the family hunted in Montana. During the summer, they went together to the Yakima powwow and to Crow Agency in Montana for the massive annual Crow Fair and Sundances. Shell furthered her interest in Native American religions and later in Buddhism. During her senior year, she attended the Bridge program to prepare for college. After graduation, she joined the U.S. Navy as a religion program specialist. The job was a fulfillment of interest from her youth. My parents hated religion, so there had never been an opportunity to pursue my spiritual interests, she said. After a wide-ranging career as a paramedic and firefighter, Shell Merrill, Joseph Fowitz, has 3 grown children and has retired. Living near Huntsville, Alabama, her work has involved providing disaster relief, body recovery, and counseling at Ground Zero in Manhattan following the 9/11 attacks, and similar work after major hurricanes and floods. Shell said that the time she spent among the Nez Perce in her youth had a lasting effect on her life and career. She memorized the famous speech Chief Joseph gave during his surrender at the Bear Paw battlefield in 1877, reciting it as part of one of her college history class requirements. I made sure my 3 children know a lot about the Nez Perce. I have told them stories about Idaho all of their lives. Shell had not spoken to her father in 20 years when she located him in 2010. He was always a whitewater guy, so we took a rafting trip down the Salmon River to the old native rock paintings near China Hole. It takes 3 days to get there by boat. I don't know if there is another way to get there. We talked about many things on the trip. It was good therapy. Since retiring recently, Shell continues to volunteer abroad. Thanks to her childhood experiences, she found that she could survive with few comforts. Recently, she traveled with an aid group to help tribes in the Masai Mara of Kenya. It may have been a struggle for some of them, but for me, it was easy. One of my native drivers and supply guides wanted to hear my stories about the natives in America. I told him about living in Lapwai and how the families there were very similar to the Maasai. They honored their elders and they shared everything. That's about all I have right now. If there's any questions or anyone would want to have some conversation, I'm happy to stick around. How are we doing on time, Kristen?
We're doing fine, Tony. We've got at least 10 minutes for questions, more if we need it. I actually have a question for Darlene, and maybe Tony, you can chime in too from your research. I was reading in the book that when they went on the Chief Joseph Trail trip, that they would kind of balance their experiences. So some of their experiences were about the history and of the tribes and the culture and Chief Joseph, but some of them, one of the experiences that they had was going up, let's see, what was it? Going up a long, narrow trail and looking, I think it was at the geology. So they were getting this really interesting, so it wasn't pictographs or petroglyphs, but it was like the geology of the area. So there was this really interesting blend of sort of cultural humanities and this really hard science. And I just wondered if you could, both of you, either of you, just comment on that, because that's not usually the way education happens.
Darlene?
Right. Well, this is a week that we were on the road. It wasn't like normally on weekends when we went camping, there was always an educational component, but this whole 8 or 9 days on the road, we had classes, then we carried on. And we had an English class and a science class and a history class and a math class. And we would stop at various places along the Chief Joseph Trail of historical or scientific interest. And then we'd break into classes, and maybe our classes ran, I don't know, 40 minutes or so. And then I had a whistle, and after 40 minutes, I'd blow the whistle. And so then the kids would rotate from one group to another, but we were far enough away that we could, carry on without kids having to be distracted by another group or whatever. And so that particular summer for the Chief Joseph Trail, I enlisted the help of one of my colleagues, Rudy Bosch, that I used to teach with at the junior high or the middle school as it is now. And Rudy was instrumental in doing the 6th grade environmental camp up at Perkins. And so he had all of this outdoor science gear, and he brought that with him. I asked him if he would come for at least the upward bound trip. I mean, the Chief Joseph Trail trip, and he consented. And so we had science on the road, and we had a very well-informed teacher who made experiences for kids. Like I can remember them in one of the rivers doing stream flow. He had all these kids standing in the river measuring depth and flow and so forth. And it was a great experience for these children.
So I know I've spent a little bit of time up in Nez Perce country and had a chance to visit their Nature's Way, I believe it's salmon hatchery, which is incredibly innovative. I mean, instead of having a rectangular tank, the tanks are shaped like an S curve, and they have generators that power the water through it. So there's current, they have deeper areas and shallower areas and resting places, and it's open to the sky. So herons can come and potentially feed on baby fish, which most hatcheries, they don't want that. But the Nez Perce people wanted to train these fish how to be wild fish. It was really a remarkable tour that I was able to get. But I wondered if some of the people that are working at the hatcheries now were some of these very same students that were in the Upward Bound program, because it blends both of those cultural traditions and both respect for both of those ways of knowing.
It wouldn't surprise me if some of our students have those kinds of positions, because they're very active, a lot of them in the tribe themselves, in tribal offices. And I can remember when when the Nez Perce took on the wolf reintroduction back in the 90s, I mean, here was a job that nobody else could do, but they had a way to do it. And yeah, so I'm sure we have, former Upward Bound students. It's a small community, but so many of them were touched by that program.
Well, I can think of one who's very involved in the Nez Perce fisheries program, and that is the son of Luke and Suzanne Penny, who are in the book, and those are two teachers who I write about quite a bit. Luke is a Nez Perce. Luke is a Nez Perce fellow, and his wife, non-Indian, and they got married and became Upward Bound instructors early on. And one of their sons, one of the Pennies, earned a PhD in biology. And at the time that I was interviewing his parents, he was in Scotland delivering a paper that he had written about salmon in that part of the world. And he's become a very well-known fish biologist. The other thought that I wanted to mention is that we often create a separation in our minds between science and culture, or between Western science and folklore or mythology, if you want to call it that. And Native people have been practicing science for a very long time. And oftentimes the science nowadays that I describe, which is combined with culture and spirituality, is traditional ecological knowledge, which, as I mentioned earlier, is something that's been elevated by this current presidential administration. But the knowledge of game management, resource management, the understanding of the land and how to live in a sustainable manner, these are elements of traditional indigenous culture, whether it is wildland cultivation, even not agriculture, but using the plants in a particular and sacred way to ensure their survival. These are traditions that are coming back now and being revitalized and being recognized for what they are. And I have found that for me, it's more a matter of expanding my concept of science rather than trying to understand the difference between traditional ecological knowledge and science. I don't know that there ever needed to be a true hard separation, and they're both valid, they're both important. So I think that's kind of where we're getting back to today.
Thank you. And I was wondering, Tony, if you could just share a little bit about some of the people that went through the program. You said that, this gentleman had a PhD, and just, maybe it's directly from the book or just your own, learning and meeting them. Who were some of the people that went through the Upward Bound program and then went on to particularly noteworthy careers?
Well, the book is structured in a way that I interviewed the elders first, the people who are now, like Chris Meyer, who's the director of the Coeur d'Alene Tribe's Education Department. She was the first PhD from the tribe, from the Coeur d'Alene Nation in history. And she didn't realize she was going to be the first PhD. Isabel finally told her. She didn't want to psych her out. There's also Otis Halfman, who I admire greatly for his work with the National Park Service. And he spent many years as a cultural relevancy specialist with the NPS. And I haven't had a chance to call him lately and ask him, what he thinks about Charles Sams being in charge of the NPS now, which is quite a development. But there are also younger generation people, you know, like Mabel Black Eagle, like Jennifer Hawker, also David Tapto, who is a military veteran and who survived combat in the Middle East in the Iraq War. So the book tells the story of 3 different generations as it moves forward, and kind of ends with the end of Isabel Bond's tenure and the evolution of the program into a new sort of constituent parts now, as it still exists on University of Idaho campus. But there are many other people in the book, also teachers like Connie Fleener, who sadly recently passed away. She was Isabel's right hand for many years in grant writing. Also Lucinda George, you know, from the Colville tribes. And she was brought on early on as a counselor and as an instructor. She would teach treaty classes, you know, to the students, native and non-native. You might as well know about the treaties having to do with that area. But they would bring in counselors like Horace Axtell, elders, you know, who would speak to the students. And they would also bring in geologists and other natural scientists to speak to them. So, you know, in that way, I think you're picking up on it, Kristen, how it really was a mix of what we consider as separate disciplines in the academies, you know. I think it blended well, as far as I can tell. And I don't think that there was ever a need to suppress Native American culture within this country in the way that it was suppressed during the periods of assimilation. And people can be scientists and also be Nez Perce. They can also be extraordinary scholars and ethnographers like Josiah Pinkham, who's in the book, and be completely fluent and knowledgeable about their language and culture, and still operate within the academic systems at a high level. But at one time, I believe that it was assumed by most people that Indians were going to sort of go away, and you had to eradicate the culture, you know, kill the Indian to save the man, that kind of policy that existed at the Carlisle Industrial School, for instance. Luckily, we're not living that way now. And I attribute these changes to the kind of idealistic and compassionate and open-minded teachers like the ones that were in the Upward Bound program. And also to the Native people who have just tremendous resiliency and determination to maintain their culture.
Well, that seems like a beautiful place to end it. So thank you, Tony Tekaroniake Evans and Darlene Dyer, and everyone else who has participated here. One person who had to leave early made a comment. She said, "Your presentation ensures that I will read the whole book."
Wonderful. Well, Kristen, thank you. Thank you very much for hosting us here. And I look forward to everything you do at the Haley Public Library. You do a wonderful job of programming. And I'll be tuning in for Rodney Fry next month, because Darlene introduced me to Rodney about a year or two ago, and he really came through for me during the final stages of our last draft of the manuscript. So I really look forward to hearing from Rodney.
Well, great. And thanks again, Tony. Thanks, Darlene. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight. It was really an inspiring program. And I look forward to finishing your book. I'm 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through. So I'm excited. So, all right. Thanks.
It was a very nice evening. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you,
Thanks, Tony
Kristen.
and Darlene.
Yep.
Thank you.
I love the book. It's just great.
Great to
Thank
see you guys.
Okay.
Bye.
Night, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.